All right. Mine is not sparing in words either, so it's not 111, but it's something. And it's not even a connected story. It's just a bunch of thoughts when I thought about what I should be thinking or writing about or talking about. So for me, I thought when I think about transformation and what's happening in today's context, I really go back to what my history is. And my history, if there was a narrative of my history, it starts in 1947 for India, because my family was a refugee from Pakistan to India. So it was a history of both a transformative event, which was the freedom struggle and the independence India got, but also it was the partition of India. So the foundation or the narrative is one of violence and hate. And that really defines where I'm coming from. So when I try and look for explanations of what's happening, it keeps going back to what was the defining moment of what our nation, the nation state, India, it was one of hate and violence and religious intolerance. And then I'm not going to obviously be able to tell you what happened in every decade since then, but then just punctuated events over time. We go to 1984, where basically there was a demand from a particular state for an independent nation. They were the Sikh people and they wanted an independent nation, and the state led a very violent desecration of a religious shrine, and we basically got terrorized by Sikhs. So all of a sudden, people who were our people who we lived and grew up with, were considered terrorists. And for a long time through the 80s, there was this fear and trauma of Sikh terrorism, and the streets were vacant. When we looked at Sikhs, we thought of barriers. Our streets were full of barriers. This is Delhi, and bombs, bus bombs. There were no protests. There were no people talking about social justice at that time. This is important, and the reason I want to, this is 1984 Sikh terrorists. We went and desecrated a temple. The state did it. This is, sorry, the pictures are not very clear, but this is Hindus, the fundamentalist Hindus desecrating an old ancient Muslim shrine, the Babri Masjid. And these people, this was also the ruling party. It was happening under the administration and guidance almost of the ruling party. At that time, we call them Hindu sevaks. Sevaks means servants of God. So the people who destroyed this mosque, ancient mosque, were the servants of God. But the people who were fighting for some independent nation and the state violated their shrine were the terrorists. So just the contradictions. I think my story is not only the narrative of violence, but how there are contradictions throughout, and how we've been tolerating as people these contradictions and internalizing them. And there's been almost silence about a lot of these issues. The only people who, the women's movement has been active. It works in its own location, in its own spaces. But generally, when I talk about mass protests, there's absence of that. Then we come to a period of literally state-led communal violence. You know, we have we have an event in Gujarat where the state and the ruling government, under its administration, there is communal violence against the Muslims. Well, the Hindus did something, burnt a train with Muslims, and Muslims burnt a train with the Hindus, and the Hindus retaliated. It's all happening under the state's law and administration, and there's absolute violence against religious minorities, and we tolerate it. And the streets of Delhi are still empty. There is no protest. So yes, there was a new form of administering what happened. There were reports and commissions that have gone on since then. We're still waiting the results of that. We're still waiting to publicly indict people who were involved. There isn't any action, but we have somehow become very tolerant of violence against religious minorities. Not only that, they have become the other. And we're still living in the same country side by side, but now the religious minorities are people who we are a little cautious about. All of a sudden, they are populating our spaces, and we are very, we notice that they're populating my space. All of this while there is the women's movement that is talking about women's issues in its own locations, and there's very little intersectionality between these two. We then go fast forward to last year. Geeta already talked about December 2012. So people took to the streets in a big way. There were men, young people, middle class people, all kinds of forms of people. Rapes have happened. Women have been abused. There have been mass crimes against women in the last 40, 45 years. Everywhere there was an incident of communal violence, women were being abused and raped. And so every episode, every incidence of tribal violence, communal violence that I could talk about, and there have been many, I just chose to show a few, women have been raped, and women have been raped even without those incidents of tribal or communal violence. But this particular event really took over people's imagination of what was happening to them, and that they had to go to the streets and really protest. And before that, the previous year, there had been the anti-corruption movement, which also brought, okay, so really, who are these people who took to the streets? Are they feminists? Do they believe in social justice? Do they care about other causes? Do they care about what's happening to tribals, to Kashmiris, to Muslims, to Nagas? Who are these people? And that's really one of the questions. Next slide. My time is up, but I want to tell you that what really troubles me is the contradictions that abound the work we do. And just quickly, two examples. One, Geeta talked about, why do we believe in violence if we are protesting violence? So we want death penalty, and are we really asking ourselves this question? And secondly, I just wanted to bring an example of issues that I work on, where we are talking about sex selection and abortion, and we are saying abortion is a right, and then sex selection is wrong. But on the other hand, as soon as you make sex selection illegal, it's really very delicately encroaching on women's rights to abortion. But then even the question prior to that, is abortion even a choice? Is it why aren't we asking questions? Is this choice to remain single, to not have kids, not to have kids with the man you're married to just be with a woman, or to just be? You know, there are lots of questions which we don't ask because we're afraid to ask questions, because then our issues that we've protected and fought for get really vulnerable. Sorry, and then next slide. Next slide. I have a slide on questions. Okay, we'll leave that for later. Thank you.